All right, I'd like to go ahead and get started. Hope you guys had a good lunch, and we're going to kick off our afternoon with a presentation from one of our sponsors. Joby Aviation is one of our gold sponsors this week, and we greatly appreciate their assistance. With that, I'd like to introduce Ryan Naru, Aviation Policy and Regulatory Affairs Lead at Joby. Ryan, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Rex, and thank you to the VFS team who has now put on, I believe, 8 of these events. Am I counting correctly? And I believe I've been at 7 of them. So, I think that it's really exciting to see the continued maturation of this industry. The presentation title today is called The Unification of the FAA's Infrastructure Standards. And I think that one of the things you might have heard from me in some of the Q&A discussion following Robert Bassey's video presentation this morning was a strong concern about the pathway we're currently on with respect to 2 different classes of vertical aviation infrastructure design guidance, and also a lot of ambiguity, if not imprecision, about how design standards are used in aviation relative to type certification, relative to the roles of flight standards and operational oversight. So a preface, this presentation is not intended to advocate for a blanket authorization, operational authorization for eVTOL to use every heliport in the NAS. I think that we all can agree there are a lot of very bad heliports in the NAS. In fact, the one that is closest to me in Long Island at the Nassau University Medical Center is one of the worst heliports I have ever seen. Talk about urban canyons. It is between 2 large buildings in a descending hill environment. I have videos of helicopters operating to that site, and it will make you cringe. Industry, however, is seeking consistency in the application of heliport design guidance to facility sponsors who may be considering a design aircraft that is a powered lift. And specifically an electric-powered lift, and we'll talk about that in a second. The following discussion will be contextualized according to the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 at the end of the presentation. So what I am going to propose here to this group does have a foundation in law, so let's come back to that in just a second. Just believe me for the next couple minutes. But again, I do really believe that we are at a fork in the road. One path, and this is again Ryan's personal opinion here, is differentiated guidance and potential segregation of our system of vertical aviation infrastructure for the next 2 to 5 years. We saw that in terms of the FAA's timelines for the development of their engineering brief update, their advisory circular update for vertiports, advisory circular for heliports, or in this moment where on Friday we will see an EB 105 revision A and have an open comment cycle to that document. We can, as an industry, in partnership with our regulator, harmonize our approach to these vertical flight design standards. I recognize that this might be a hard pill to swallow for some people who have been very much involved in the development of this guidance and who may see there to be a need for differentiated guidance. I will try and address all of those points in this presentation. I think that before we begin, it's really important to also have a mutual common understanding of kind of the 3 most important branches of the FAA that are going to be involved in this discussion. The first is the Aircraft Certification Service. They're going to allow for the production of certified aircraft with certified performance data that are suitable for their intended purpose with an equivalent level of safety to existing aircraft, which is required by rule. 2117B, we talk about that magic rule all the time, which is for special class airworthiness criteria. What's missed in the actual text of that rule is that the FAA must ensure that there's an equivalent level of safety to aircraft certified under the other existing normal category parts, like 23 or 27. That needs to underpin our understanding. These products will not be less safe. They will not be less performant. They cannot be. And if they are, they will be placarded or receive an operational limitation. Flight Standards Service, AFS, their responsibility is to certify, inspect, surveil, investigate, and enforce aviation operations. We talk a lot, Rex on his safety promotion efforts about 91, 103, 135, 229, about the airport facility needing to be appropriate for the intended operation. There's definitely been a lack of enforcement on that. I think in helicopter operations to date, Rex has done a great job talking about that. But it is very important to remember it is flight standards' responsibility to investigate and enforce those rules. And then there's the Office of Airports. They provide the standards for planning, design, and construction of aviation infrastructure. The Office of Airports does not limit operations or prescribe how operations should be conducted. It's extremely important to realize that there is a difference here between each of the roles and responsibilities of these various services within the FAA. And why am I making that point? Well, there's two recent publications that I think we should look to beyond Robert's comments this morning as why I am concerned about this. In March of 2024, the FAA published a AAM infrastructure website. In the Q&A section at the bottom of that website, there is a discussion about conversion, a conversion process from a heliport to a vertiport. They speak to dual use facilities that operate as both a heliport and a vertiport. And then recently, just in the last week, the notice of availability, the quote, again, pulling from the scope statement here, this draft EB provides updated interim safety standards for aviation facilities that electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft use for takeoff and landing. Again, for whatever reason, we keep looking at vertiport as an idea related to operations and not as something that is a set of standards that are provided to facility sponsors to design or modify a facility. And so when you start injecting that into the conversation, what you have is enormous ambiguity being injected into our aviation ecosystem, both within industry, state DOTs who are responsible for permitting and evaluation of facilities, who already have regulations and policies on the books for how they send inspectors out to permit and evaluate these facilities, on how they receive documents. Folks who are having to stand up entirely new and parallel practices and scratching their head and wondering what is the difference. I've heard it from the FAA themselves. It's a difference without distinction. But these questions are all fair game. Are heliports for helicopters only? Are vertiports for eVTOL only? Are parallel permitting processes required? Are existing permitting processes suitable for dual use facilities? If a heliport is converted to a vertiport, can helicopters be banned? That's an interesting one. Can I ban all helicopters from New York City by converting heliports to vertiports? I hope not, but I certainly think the community will try. All of those concession agreements that are underpinned by that word, heliport, suddenly become fair game for renegotiation. Suddenly all kinds of new municipal challenges to our vertical flight community will be brought forward. Can states mandate public use for vertiports? I think that we all saw in the last 2 years some firms trying to use the new word as an opportunity for leverage with respect to mandating that all vertiports be public use in whatever the, I think, smallest political district. I forget the exact terminology. Speak to me after, I'll tell you exactly who was running that game plan. But again, on our current path, all of these questions are fair game. It is a big problem, especially as I deal with airport authorities. So here's the proposal. I know it's controversial. The FAA should cease defining vertiports as a distinct class of infrastructure with differentiated standards and operational suitability frameworks. The FAA Office of Airports should have a single standard for vertical aviation infrastructure design. And EB 105A, the document that we'll see on Friday, should be revised to only include the following content to supplement the existing heliport design advisory circular. That last one in particular is actually the path the industry was on back when I was at Uber Elevate, right? We had a heliport design standard, and the request was, how can we incorporate controlling dimension into the existing heliport design AC? Well, we don't want to redo the whole heliport design AC. Let's do an engineering brief. That's a very lightweight document. It's a process we have before. And then suddenly we made a left turn. But this is also not very controversial, as in the time between my experience at Uber Elevate and today, we actually did get a new heliport design AC, and it introduced a new scope statement and the controlling dimension concept. Wow, this was things were looking good for a second. AC 150 5392D provides standards for the planning, design, and construction of heliports serving helicopters with single, tandem, or dual side-by-side rotors. The controlling dimension requirements in AC 150 5392D satisfy the needs for these aircraft. AW 609, guess what? That's a powered lift, guys. And the CH-47, operated here by Coulson Aviation. Those are tandem and side-by-side rotor concepts. So how should we write EB-105A? I know we haven't seen it, but we also haven't had a chance to directly participate in the drafting of it. Well, here's what I would suggest we do. Rather than going line by line in this document and suggesting our nits, we essentially dump it and bring in just these essential elements. We harmonize essentially the definitions related to controlling dimension. So this would be a supplement to the existing 5392D, where the definition that was in the original draft of EB-105 is retained. The controlling dimension diagram or any other supplemental diagrams are provided to make it easier for heliport sponsors to understand how to measure and utilize design aircraft that are not conventional helicopter designs or tandems or side-by-sides. We, in the engineering brief, make sure it's very clear that design helicopter really means design aircraft or design VTOL capable aircraft. We talk a lot about performance. We recognize type certification as the basis for performance expectations. This could include a requirement for hover out of ground effect. And I would argue one of the things we're not talking about a lot is how much hover out of ground effect time should be expected at the arrival at one of these facilities. We talk a lot about power fade for electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. We need to make sure that they have sufficient hover out of ground effect capability when they arrive. 17 knot all azimuth, that's a typical Part 27 certification requirement as well. We do hovering, handling quality task elements, right? Again, informed from Part 27 certification practice. And certified performance data. Well, I don't know why that said related to, but I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a second. We should think about improving our whole vertical aviation design standards system, right? We should not be only addressing outwash in a vertiport standard. I think that many of the folks in this room have probably gone to the East Side Heliport in Manhattan, seen S-76s take off and land at a distance probably from the fence line that is the front of my podium to where Tori is right now in the middle of the room. That's how close those helicopters are from that fence line. Is there outwash? You bet. It's exciting. Sure love standing there. Is it dangerous? Are we going to shut down that heliport? Probably not. Now, I think that we should be considering it. There are thousands and thousands of helicopter operations every day. We saw what happened in the UK with an S-92, how outwash can actually cause fatal accidents. We should be addressing that for our current heliport and helicopter operations as well as VTOL aircraft. I know that there's been many folks who have identified errata or core agenda that need to be added to the 5392D. Let's do that through EB-105A until we get to our next AC for the heliport design. And I think that when we talk about charging infrastructure, it's worth noting that that is not a VTOL specific issue, right? And that might be better positioned in a standalone engineering brief. Going back to certified performance data, the only performance data that matters. This coming out of a 1980s technical brief from the FAA that there was a lot of energy and excitement in vertical flight at the time, both from the civil tilt rotor work, but also the National Prototype Heliport program, which was seeking to fund up to 20 public heliports across cities in the United States. I think they built 4. I'm not sure how many others, or at least they funded 4 projects. Everyone knows the helicopters not all helicopters, but most helicopters have HV diagrams that describe combinations of heights and velocity that when you have a engine failure might be unrecoverable. Now, these are not limitations. Helicopter pilots today fly through the shaded out portions of HV envelopes. They recognize and understand the risk, that it is temporary. They are not prohibited from flying through it unless the operator itself or the customer mandates that they not fly through it. The same is true for Category A operations, which is flyaway capability for aircraft certified to Category A performance. There's no operational rules today that say that if you're going to operate a helicopter in an urban environment that you need Category A performance. There is no operating rules. It's something that we do not do. And as a New Yorker, I see lots and lots of Part 27 aircraft flying passengers all day that do not have that flyaway capability. That's the system we're operating in now. Just a little look at what S-76 performance can look like. Let's say 85% max gross weight, sea level standard day. We got tons of performance relative to our various climb gradients. But the reality is that an S-76 at max gross weight at 4,000 feet on a hot day does not have a ton of performance. And so how we measure that is really important. And the question is, would we then restrict S-76 VTOL operations in that condition? No, of course not, right? Does the design guidance only evaluate potential hazards on that 8-to-1 service? Yes, it does. Surface. But it's still the pilot and the operator's responsibility to understand where they're operating and whether or not they have the capability in their aircraft that day to complete the operation with the airspace that they have and their risk tolerance. Now, maybe that S-76 might leave some fuel behind, might leave some passengers behind, bring its operating envelope back into a place that the operator prefers, or they evaluate and see that they have the airspace they need, they can use effective translational lift, they're up and out. I think that what I'm trying to impart on you all is that we can be a little bit too academic sometimes in how we think about these issues. So in the context of the 2024 FAA reauthorization, is the proposal that I brought to you today legal? Is it possible? And I will tell you yes, even by subsection by subsection basis. So Section 958, Infrastructure Supporting Vertical Flight, requires the FAA to publish an update to EB 105. That's great. We're going to do that. We're going to see a proposal on Friday, and we'll have an opportunity to comment on it. And the FAA will have an opportunity to rewrite it and publish it before the end of the year based on how we comment and make suggestions on how it should look. The legislation does not require this to be an entirely separate design standard. The section as a whole, that is Section 958, provides direction towards unified guidance. And indeed, we saw Robert speak to his intention to have a single standard at some point in the future. What I'm proposing is that we bring that future to the present. Section 958 requires the FAA to publish a performance-based vertiport design advisory circular not later than the end of next year and update or begin the work necessary to update the heliport design advisory circular to provide performance-based guidance, including consideration of alternative fuel and propulsion mechanisms. So what I say here is that the FAA can and should consider this one task, as the legislation clearly indicates the need for these standards to be informed by aircraft performance and points to the unification of guidance and dual use for new and existing facilities C958C. In the context of heliport and vertiport design standards, the use of the term performance-based by the Office of Airports means informed by the performance of typical aircraft. It does not mean state the safety objective and propose flexible means of compliance to achieve those safety objectives. That's what traditionally performance-based rulemaking means. Performance-based in terms of what we're seeing out of heliport design means I have a good understanding of what helicopters can do, therefore I feel good with the assumptions I'm making with the use of this document. I refer back, though, to the importance of type certification and establishing adequate performance for these aircraft and making sure that they're fit for purpose. That's what this last bullet is about. We satisfy performance-based with a more explicit preamble speaking to the type certification expectations. Section 958 requires that the FAA shall establish a mechanism by which owners and operators of aviation infrastructure can safely accommodate or file a notice to accommodate powered lift aircraft if such infrastructure meets the safety requirements or guidance of the FAA for such aircraft. This could be a very problematic section if we are not careful with how it applies. I'll just leave you for a second to read that again and process it. But it's really important that this is not direction to differentiate the safety requirements for powered lift. Oh, well, just as things were getting good, we were heating up.
The question is,
I do.
I do. All right. I think that should be about everybody. So once I get her seats.
I'll just keep it rolling.
Yeah, no, that's
Sounds good.
cool.
Hey, everyone, thanks so much. I also thanks to the VFS, actually thanks to Rex, who's going to give me all this extra time now in the agenda. You are now not able to go to dinner on time. I'm sorry. Forget the cocktail hour. You're spending it with me. So, it was, we were definitely doing some controversial stuff here, so I had to hit eject. But I actually do hope it's memorable, and that we think about this content a bit together. We dialogue on it. I'd love to be able to take some Q&A. Let me wrap up actually though pretty quickly. So I'm going to post these online. We can talk about it more later. The truth is that the mechanism, right, that's even talked about in this section really should be our existing operational safety framework supplemented by SMS, right? Rex has been doing a really great job talking about how vertical flight needs to be underpinned by SMS, not just as an operating, like part 5 on our 135 operations, but also on our vertical aviation infrastructure as well when we're serving passenger operations in particular. I think it's going to be critically important. The one thing I'm going to go back to just for a second, though, too, is that this language here, so that the FAA shall establish a mechanism by which owners and operators of aviation infrastructure can safely accommodate or file notice to accommodate powered lift aircraft if such infrastructure meets safety requirements or guidance of the FAA for such aircraft. This is, again, not a direction to differentiate the standards, and it does not transfer safety responsibilities from the aircraft operator, who is ultimately responsible for making sure that their aircraft is compatible with that particular landing site, to the heliport owner or operator. Right? Heliport owners and operators are responsible for maintaining a safe takeoff and landing surface, the airspace, et cetera. There's really no difference there, though, when we're talking about either helicopters or powered lift. So we need to be careful here by saying, well, we're going to put this new notice out that my heliport can accommodate powered lift. That should not have any sort of safety or liability implications for the person who's filing that notice. All right. So let's just go to the last thing. What notice to accommodate really could mean. If we're really thinking about how are we improving the whole system, not just a vertiport or powered lift system, it's that revisions of our airport master record documents, the 5010 forms, that currently use runway length. Boy, my spelling here was not great. Should have appropriate TLOF, FADO, and safety area dimensions. I know, Cliff, you guys have been working a lot on that. So, hey, that box is checked in terms of this element of FAA reauth. And I think that, we all know Section 958 also mandates the eventual sunsetting of EB 105. This can happen with the new heliport design advisory circular that incorporates EB 105A as I've just proposed it, and any additional improvements that might be recommended over the next few years. A few last thoughts. The FAA does not have congressional authorization to certify general aviation airports, including heliports, or any new class of vertiport. Instead, individual states, to a varying degree, incorporate the FAA's heliport design standards as a basis for their permitting processes. Rex has been repeating that over and over and over again. We've talked about the limitations of Part 139 and how those are congressionally mandated limitations. Industry is going to need to take care of itself. Now, what I am not saying here is that we shouldn't be required to take care of ourselves. What I'm saying is that if we differentiate between heliports and vertiports, we're going to be diluting our safety resources. We are not going to be all pulling in the same direction. And what I would be very afraid of is that there would be some high bar, some high standard expected from what's a vertiport, and we can continue to let what I think many folks in the United States would agree is a lot of room for improvement in heliport practice, operational practice, design practice, go unaddressed because we're only focusing on advanced air mobility. That just doesn't seem to make sense to me. The FAA does not have congressional authorization to establish any new noise standards or to serve that can serve as a basis for the distinction from heliports, nor can they ban aircraft from, let's just say a vertiport class exists, nor can they ban aircraft from vertiports based on noise or propulsion type. I've heard the argument, in fact, I might have been the one to make it 6 or 7 years ago, that this idea of differentiating, even at the federal level, a class of infrastructure would be great as a way to introduce infrastructure to communities, to make sure that there was a clear from the top differentiation of, no, this is not a heliport, Grandma, this is a vertiport, and it will be quiet. Those were uber elevate thoughts. And I think that we all can acknowledge we have matured as an industry. We know that that's not possible. Hanging on to these ideas on a federal level does not make sense. FAA Reauth did not suggest imparting a new single event noise criteria on vertiports, differentiating vertiports from heliports based on noise. I can tell you I was on the Hill. I can tell you it was discussed. And I can tell you I was thrown out of the room. So, what does that leave us with? A difference without distinction, as Robert had put it at Heli Expo. I acknowledge that this is, again, somewhat perhaps out of left field relative to the current state of industry dialogue, but would encourage us to strongly consider during this EB 105 comment period recommending as an industry that we, rather than look at line-by-line improvements, focus on the really good standard we have for heliport design and strengthen our entire vertical aviation infrastructure community. Happy to take questions, but thank you again for this opportunity to present to you today. I'll head one question off, Rex. We're both on the NFPA 418 committee.
Yes.
We spent a lot of time talking about fire and life safety requirements. The biggest differentiators from a fire and life safety perspective, though, are with respect to facilities that are on top of normally occupied structures. And so my question for you, Rex, is how many of those 56 public use heliports are on top of a normally occupied structure where our open access policies might create safety challenges from a fire and life safety perspective?
There are currently 53 public use heliports in the United States. You almost got it right.
Almost.
To memory serve, there's probably really only 2 that I can think of that are on a structure. Now, the question there is it an occupied structure? Because when you look at structure, you also have to look, is it occupied or not occupied? In this case, the 2 in question, one is in Portland, Oregon, and the other one is in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Both are on parking garages. Those, by definition, are not occupied. So the fire safety piece is slightly different. I can't, off the top of my head, think of any other public use facilities that are actually elevated. Dallas. No, you're right. But that's most of everything underneath the actual heliport is still parking. So yeah, Bill's right.
So, the reason I bring that up and put it in the context of public and private is because, I think that when differentiation might need to be required, or that advantage might be sought from a heliport designer or sponsor to perhaps not incorporate foam fire suppression systems, because it is not the required system, but it is certainly enough for an eVTOL. The PPR framework could be one way to keep inappropriate aircraft out of that facility. In the end, it is still ultimately the operator's responsibility to have the permission from a PPR facility sponsor to operate there, but to also be aware of any other sort of facility limitations that would keep their aircraft from being suitable from using a particular operating site. A 747 pilot does not fly to a 2,000-foot runway.
Pandora's box, we could go down that line for several days. That said, in the interest of time,
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead and start moving forward. But I would also encourage you, number one, to look at the engineering brief when it comes out. I'm not sure who's going to be spearheading industry's involvement. That may come through VAI. I have a feeling that they'll probably, try to put something through in their new council system. Vertical Flight Society, we do have a focus group that will be paying very close attention to that. But if you have a question, if you have a comment, if you have whatever you have, let me know. I'm the infrastructure advisor for VFS. I'm more than happy to be the gatekeeper for introducing information and people. So with that, thank you, Ryan. Greatly appreciated.